Definitely. Carol Rudy is the educational coordinator at the Museum of Russian Art. She uses research skills to present Russian art and culture programs. And if you haven't been to one of her programs before, you are in for a treat. So grab something warm and sit back and enjoy.
And it is really good to be back with all of you. Thanks to all of you for taking time out this morning to learn a little bit about Russian holidays and a little bit perhaps about the Museum of Russian Art along the way, and also something about 19th and 20th century Russian Empire and Soviet Union art on the topic. So we're going to launch in primarily into the winter holidays because there's snow on the ground where you are, and there's certainly snow on the ground at last where I am as well. So we need to start thinking about those winter holidays. Just a word for those of you who don't know about the Museum of Russian Art. This is our building on the corner of 35W and Diamond Lake Road. So very easy to find in terms of the metro freeway grid. We're exactly right off the freeway at the exit of 35W and Diamond Lake Road. And we're in this repurposed church. Used to be a congregational church. They moved across the street. And over time and over evolution of usage, we acquired it, and it has now been remodeled internally to be a really wonderful small museum space. You will see the colors hanging on what is our elevator shaft. Those are, of course, the Ukrainian colors. More than 2 years ago now, the war broke out between Putin and the Ukraine, and we needed to take a stand on that particular situation because, of course, for us, the word Russian means Russian Empire and Soviet Union, and that encompasses a huge swath of territory. So we have any number of Ukrainian friends, donors, and people who entrust their Ukrainian art collections to us. So this statement has been on our website ever since the war broke out. And all of us at the museum are in pain for what is happening in Ukraine right now, and has over time, particularly the suffering of the people, their perpetual desire for independence and freedom, and the destruction of cultural artifacts that is happening even as we speak. Our curator, herself Russian, but with family in Ukraine and Siberia, has coordinated an exhibit at the museum that started basically when the war started, an exhibit of cartoons from cartoonists who are both Russian Federation and Ukrainian. The Russian Federation cartoonists who are contributing to this anti-war cartoon exhibit are, of course, no longer in Russia, where they would be persecuted. But the Ukrainian folks are still pretty much still in creating art from Ukraine. So here's an example, for example, of one of the anti-war cartoons that you would find in the small exhibit that we host at the museum, indicating our support for the end of this war and for Putin withdrawing his aggression. When I talk about Russia these days, and I became very sensitive to this when the war broke out, so I tried to be much more clear about the situation and about where these art pieces are coming from, because I've become very conscious of what's true about this map. In other words, the map you see in front of you indicates how Russia, which is the small brown area right here, how Russia over time expanded through territories into, of course, Asia, but also into Ukraine and into Eastern Europe. And and as well into what we might call the northern Middle East. And so the word empire is, of course, appropriate here, Russian Empire, with multiple ethnicities, multiple religious expressions, etc., but all bound together in one political system. And so I become very careful to talk about the Russian Empire when I talk about art, as well as indicate as much as I can the potential ethnicity or preferred designation that people groups from this huge area would want to make. And that, of course, is particularly true of Ukraine and its situation, both within the Russian Empire. And here is a map of the Soviet Union, which basically took over the territory of that empire, including the takeover of Ukraine. So I try to be real clear about that not all of that will be evident in this particular presentation, but know that the word Russian for us in our name does not mean exclusively the culture of people who ethnically define themselves as Russian. It also includes Ukrainian, Belarusian. We've had other Eastern European artists included as well in exhibits that we do. So that's a little bit about the Museum of Russian Art in our current situation. So let's talk about winter celebrations as mostly as they're defined by how the artist expressed them. So prior to the Soviet Union, when the Russian Empire existed, it existed with the Russian Orthodox Church as the primary spiritual carrier of spiritual unity and integrity. That's not to say that there weren't sizable populations of Jewish people, Muslim people, and other religions within the empire. But when we're talking about Russia, that is the small part of Russia that is that leads the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union, we're really talking about the Russian Orthodox Church and its cultural influence throughout the empire. And we have to then start with Russian Orthodox Christmas, which because of various changes in calendar and usages of calendar, falls on January 7. And to talk about that is, of course, first of all, to talk about the visuals that connect with the story itself. And those visuals in the Russian Orthodox experience are, of course, icons, which in Russia were introduced in Kiev, in the Kievan Russian Empire in the 10th century. And so there's a long history of creating iconography, visuals that support this Christmas story. And here's, of course, the Annunciation from a 16th, 17th century icon in Yaroslavl. And you can see, of course, the angel coming to the mother, to our mother. That's the Virgin Mary and other places. She is reading a book appropriately, so she is enthralled in the text. And above her head, you can see a small dove, which of course represents in iconography the Holy Spirit. And so this is the Annunciation story. Here is the presentation story, coming to the temple, bringing baby Jesus to the temple to encounter Simeon and Anna. And here is an icon that tells the whole story. You can see what its basic theme is, because in the center of the icon, right here, if you can see my pointer, is the nativity itself. But clustered around the story of the Nativity are scenes from all of the other bits and pieces of Advent and post-Advent, that is, the stories that happen after Jesus is born. And those are all in their own, for the most part, in their own little individual windows here in a very typical icon fashion. So you can see how much theology and biblical story is embedded into the visuals of this icon. And it's a very complex icon, as you can see, with lots of elements in it. Not all of the icons of the story of the Nativity are this complex. So what happens when Peter the Great enters the Russian Empire, and in fact, makes it really an empire, at least an autocratic empire? What happens when he comes on the scene and wants to turn the Russian Empire into a something that's more European? Well, and that of course comes about because he makes a visit to Europe, principally to the Netherlands and to England and also to France. But he's interested in shipbuilding after all, and so he goes to the Netherlands to learn that. But he picks up as well the importance of art as we know it, that is Western style painting on canvas, three-dimensional. As we know it, he picks that up and wants to import that in as well. And so with Peter the Great begins a tradition of Western style painting in St. Petersburg. And I'm going to show you what artists, Western style Russian Empire artists do with the concept of the Annunciation, etc. Here is Ivanov painting a painting of the Annunciation. And you can see what he's doing there. He's trying in a three-dimensional space. Notice the three-dimensionality of the room in which this event is happening. He tries, that's very Western style. That is not an icon style thing, but that's a very Western style. But in the foreground, not with halos as the icon would have done it, but with light and circles of light. He surrounds this mysterious mystery event of the Annunciation. And it's really beautifully done, and a struggle for him to figure out how to render that in visual conception. Similarly, here is his Joseph's dream story when the angel comes to Joseph and talks and reminds him that he should be marrying Mary, not only, but also later when they need to flee. And a huge influence in a late 18th century painting is Rembrandt. Here is a Ukrainian Russian Empire artist named Ilya Repin painting the Nativity in a very Rembrandt kind of style, right? With that directed lighting, just highlighting the baby himself. You don't need halos in this particular painting to know that Jesus and his mother are the important people in this particular setting, even though much else is included. This style of painting also influences, this Western style also begins to influence church painting. So once again, we're in Kyiv in the cathedral, the latest cathedral to be built in Kyiv. And one of the finest of our Western style painters is asked to paint the frescoes in that particular space. And this is what he produces. Now, you can see this is much more like the nativity you would see in an icon. The halos are there, for example. The traditional wording in Jesus' halo is there, and the angels are here. But altogether, this is done in a much more Western style look, realistic look, than are the traditional icons. And from here, we get the avant-garde folks in the painting tradition at the turn of the 20th century. And here's Villeneuve with Adoration of the Magi, as far from an icon as you can probably get, and pushing the bounds even of Western painting. And then if you really want to see what he does as his style evolves there in St. Petersburg, here is his Magi from 1914. He's developed his own expressive, what he calls analytical style to convey the heart of the subject matter. An incredible piece, and Villeneuve is an incredible artist in the Russian Empire. There are other traditions that our painters also capture. Here, for example, is caroling. So groups of people, often children, will go from house to house. And once again, I'm calling your attention to the fact that this is Ukraine, because the house is a typical Ukrainian and not a Northern Russian house. So very interesting that this particular painter chooses to put this caroling, this Orthodox caroling scene in that setting, as opposed to this setting. And this painter lives in the north of Russia, and so places this same caroling scene within the confines of a very typical, what I would call log cabin Northern Russian house. In Northern Russia, of course, trees dominate, and so building is all in wood. And the traditional house in the Russian villages would look very much like what we would call a log cabin, constructed by large logs and all in wood. So you can see very clearly the different kind of culture that this particular habit or ritual works with. So I've already mentioned Peter the Great. So now let's talk a little bit more specifically about what Peter the Great brought into the Russian Empire. This would be the 1700s, of course. Here he is in a Western style painting. And here he is much later, in a painting done much later, but reflecting back on the incredible changes that he brought. So here's Peter the Great, dressed Western style, and he's looking at a person dressed in traditional style. Notice the woman sitting down also in traditional Russian style, and the boyar looking on. And in the painting on the wall is his father dressed in traditional Russian Tsarist garb. Peter the Great, in bringing Western style clothing to Russia, changed lots of things, and he forced his court to abandon their Russian style clothing fashions and adopt Western style clothing. He also brought in the concept of carnival at Christmas time, a Western style sense of what ought to happen at Christmas time around this winter holiday. Here is an etching illustrating the bringing in of that, and also a painting that shows what he was advocating: masquerades, parades. This particular piece is called The Great Masquerade of 1722, when Peter the Great brought those traditions in. And he even brought in something, or suggested, didn't really bring it in, but suggested something, another thing foreign to the winter celebrations of the time, and that is the use of fir trees, evergreen trees. But those didn't really become popular until this woman, whose birth name is Charlotte, from Prussia. This particular woman marries the heir to the throne, Tsarevich Alexander, excuse me, Nicholas the First. She marries him, and being from Germany, Prussia, these are all paintings of her and her children. Here is her and her fiance at the time. She, of course, grew up with a German style celebration of Christmas. And so she was determined that that German style celebration was going to accompany her as the wife of the heir apparent to the Russian Empire. And so the very first Christmas celebration with a German style Christmas tree was held in her palace. And from there on, every year, there is always a Christmas tree celebration with the party, with the proverbial party, the galas, you might say, courtesy of the Tsar and Tsarina, particularly after Nicholas I becomes Tsar. So this, of course, has a trickle-down effect. Because the Tsar and Tsarina set the cultural norm for the Russian Empire at the time, particularly among the noble and middle class, you now have the Christmas tree officially introduced into the Russian Empire. And with that, the Christmas fairs, we are, of course, accustomed and very well aware of the tours in Europe to the Christmas fairs. Perhaps some of you have done those. Well, they now get imported into St. Petersburg, Moscow, and all the other cities where Christmas trees now can be purchased. And the accoutrements, because you can't just have a tree, you have to decorate the tree. And so all the accoutrements that go with that are also available at the various Christmas fairs. Now, initially, they all come from Germany, right? Because Germany is the source of Christmas tree celebrations. So lots of the ornaments and the ideas come from Germany. But it doesn't take long, particularly in what we might call the Victorian era, for the Russian Empire to begin to produce some of its own Christmas ornaments so that you could go to stores and Christmas fairs and purchase ornaments that were made basically in the Russian Empire. However, most of those ornaments look very much like the original German ornaments that came in first. So in other words, the German taste and the German custom of a Christmas tree in the Russian Empire really remains the norm. Here you have the four Grand Duchesses, daughters of Nicholas II, in the Winter Palace around one of their Christmas trees. This is a photograph of the four girls with one of their Christmas trees. And we have some lovely paintings of Alexander III and Nicholas II's Christmas celebrations, because Nicholas II's sister, Olga, was an artist. And so she painted paintings that had to do with Christmas celebrations, along with, of course, a whole variety of other kinds of watercolors, etc. So here we have her paintings of the kind of Christmas that happened in the Winter Palace and in all the other palaces. And interestingly enough, in this particular painting, she includes a painting over the mantle of her father, Alexander III. So you see him overlooking this particular Christmas celebration. And you can see what's included here: baubles and shiny tinsely things, and snowflakes, and even poinsettias and flowers. And tucked away there is a nativity set. So we're talking here very much now about a German kind of custom that has come to the Russian Empire. Even the Nutcracker came to the Russian Empire and became part of the celebration options. But that's not all, of course. There's all kinds of things, of celebrations that happen now around this collection of holidays, Christmas and New Year's. And here you see some of that recorded in the paintings of the time. So here is a famous Russian Empire American painter named Leon Gaspard, who paints this Russian Christmas dated 1914, for example. And here is a painting of the fir tree sale in 1918, painted in 1918. Getting ready for Christmas, a painting from 1896, and you can see what the family's doing. They're putting together paper chains and homemade ornaments, because that was all the craze, to self-decorate, to put your family to work, to create these kinds of wonderful things. And the emergence of a Grandfather Frost and Snow Maiden. Here's a painting of Snow Maiden from 1899. More on that later. And then a wonderful tradition arrived in Russia, the Russian Empire as well. And that is the tradition of sending cards, in this case, postcards. Now think about it. You cannot send something in the mail until the mail exists. And the mail and the postal system, which started in England, the postal system gradually spread around the world, including us, but including the Russian Empire. And so there's a postal system now, and that means that you can create things to send through it. And the first Russian Christmas cards and so forth, of course, came from England for the most part, or from Germany, but postcard sending became the thing to do. So what happened initially often is that the postcards and the cards would come in without words on them, and then the Russian printers, the Russian Empire printers, would create the words on the outside. And then gradually, of course, postcard and card production became Russian in orientation. But that's what you're seeing here largely. You can send a postcard beginning in 1894. It becomes legal in the Russian Empire to send just a postcard and not something that is larger than that. First of all, interesting, you can see these two pieces that I showed you first are kind of generic, Christmassy kind of pieces. You could send them anywhere. But gradually, as you will begin to see by the churches and other items unique to Russia, these begin to be printed, especially in Russia and for Russia. And here you see the churches in the background, the up north wooden churches in the background, a snowball fight, which you could have in Germany, but this is set in Russia now. And here you have the Red Square, which is obviously Russian. And you can tell again by the various accoutrements that these kinds of things are definitely meant for the Russian Empire. Again, a very German look, but notice how the woman is dressed. She is dressed in classic Russian outfit. There comes to Russia a famous illustrator of this kind of thing. She does book illustration. She does all kinds of illustration. She's born in St. Petersburg to a noble family in St. Petersburg, spends her childhood there, enters a school of painting, and so becomes a well-recognized artist with and marries a prominent Hungarian, but remains a noted and functioning artist, particularly in this genre. These, of course, now become global. And by the way, they're highly collectible too. These postcards, all of which feature her particular kind of child or human on them. And all of them have to do, of course, with the kind of Christmas celebrations that could be happening anywhere in the places that celebrate Christmas, particularly in the winter. So here you have her contribution globally, not just to the Russian Empire people, not to those folks celebrating Christmas there, but basically worldwide. So how about the painters? Now, I'm here to tell you that Russian Empire painters who live in the northern part of Russia, which is not difficult to do, by the way, since Russia, the Russian Empire is mostly above the 50th parallel in terms of its geographic setting, which means that it is basically Canada in our understanding. So there's lots of opportunity to paint winter scenes. And the Russian Empire painters who paint those northern scenes, and there's lots of them, become masters at painting snow and at developing paintings that feature in some fashion the northern depths of winter environment. And here, for example, a very famous landscape painter named Shushkin in the Russian Empire is painting this, simply called Winter. What else can you say? Winter in the up north, northern pine and birch forest. That's what it looks like. And another famous landscape painter painting village in winter, very typical northern village. You can see by the kind of log cabin look on the houses there. And Kuznetsov, another well-known Russian Empire painter, uses another side of winter to illustrate hardship. So here's a couple moving house in the middle of the winter. And once again, you can tell that it's a hardship situation. They've got their goods that they're carrying with them. Even the little dog in the front is shivering with cold, and that's illustrating the hard life of people on the edge having to move in the winter. And then winter also inspires more avant-garde, more people more interested in form and light and color than they are in capturing minute detail. This is Moonlight in a Forest Winter, and a very impressionistic piece. Again, turn of the century, 1907, by a well-known Russian Empire painter named Grabar. Beautiful impressionism with the sunrise coming up behind those trees. Again, another piece by him, picking up that incredible ability to render snow, because you know snow isn't really white. If you paint it, it's got multifaceted coloration in it, and there's a lot of blue in order to emphasize how cold it really is. Even the shadows are not black, but they're blue, they're cold blue. So a beautiful rendering again by Grabar, this time in 1921. So he maintains that impressionistic kind of look. So that is Christmas, but that is not the end of winter in the Russian Empire. Winter is very long and very cold and dark for the most part. Think Alaska, of course, and the length of daylight in Alaska, very similar to Russia. And so there are other events that happen as we move from Christmas, from that moment to Lent and Easter. And one of those things is Pancake Week, where all kinds of things happen in the cold. Lots of festivities. Here we see a theatrical group in one of the towns. Well, in St. Petersburg, actually, a painting done in 1869. There would be lots of puppetry going on, lots of festivals going on during this week. Here is another painter rendering a version of that kind of event happening. And if you should not think of that happening only in St. Petersburg, of course, but also in the various villages where ice slides and skating and skiing and feasting go on during this particular week, including the creation of a snow fort that can be literally fought over with snowballs, etc. Until you get to the Sunday of Forgiveness, at which point one is to confess all of one's sins. The time for revelry is past. One is to make apologies where those apologies are to be made. There is a tradition of taking this female figure outside of town at the end and actually setting her on fire and burning her as an indication that winter is about to end, Lent is happening, and Easter is in the forecast. And of course, with Easter, we think of spring, even though Easter in March might actually be, just as it is here, sometime on the edge of winter. But it is the face to new life. Well, that's the story, part of the story, told through artworks principally, and to give you just a little hint of what winter celebrations might have been like pre-1917. Because with 1917, we get chaos for one thing, civil war, and we get the takeover of not just the political side, the public square side of this geographic area, but also the cultural side. Now, the Constitution for the Soviet Union guaranteed religious freedom, but the Communist Party was an atheist party, and a group arose to do away with a society of atheists, to do away with, in fact, it's called the League of Militant Atheists in translation, to do away with everything religious. Here is a copy of their magazine, and the front of the magazine of this particular issue illustrates that Christmas trees are now banned. And they're banned because they're associated with Christmas. Now, the religious folks of the day, including the clergy of the Russian Orthodox, various Orthodox churches, said the Christmas tree is not religious. It is just a custom. But the Soviet authorities, particularly as inspired by the League of Militant Atheists, did not agree. and of course banned the use of the Christmas tree, as they banned all religious celebrations. Again, the driving force behind this is that society that I mentioned. Here is a front of another piece of their the front of another issue of their magazine, and it is a front that demands the repression of all Abrahamic faiths. In other words, not just the Christians, but also the Jewish faith and the Islamic faith, because all three of them are connected to Abraham and to the what Christians call the Old Testament, what Jewish people call the Torah and the sacred writings. All three of these religions depend on that text for its base. And so this particular atheistic group fueled the anti-religious sentiment. On Kiev in Ukraine, on the Kiev Cave Monastery, you can see a banner. And the banner says, "Monks, the bloody enemies of the working people." So it's that banner is been placed over the doorway of that monastery. Many, many clergy people were, of course, sent to the Gulag or killed. And by the time we get to World War II, there's only about 300 functioning churches. Synagogues and mosques are also eliminated. And basically, this particular group plus the Communist Party have effectively removed all religious celebrations from the Soviet Union. The anti-Christmas children's demonstration in 1929 is an evidence of this. These children are holding up a banner that says, "Parents, don't confuse us, don't organize Christmas celebration." And on the right, "Raise your children with the help of a teacher, not God." So it's this kind of sentiment that is being pushed and being recorded in these photographs. In this photograph on the left, these workers are dismantling a church and also stopping to read the latest edition of the magazine that I just showed you, entitled, by the way, "The Godless." And so that kind of push is happening in this world. Well, there's no Christmas. Until 1936, there is no Christmas. And then in 1936, from the memoirs of Nikita Khrushchev, we get this. "We sat in Stalin's car and talked. Postyavis then raised the question, 'Comrade Stalin, that would be a good tradition and people would like it, and especially it would bring joy to the children to have a New Year tree.' Stalin supported him. 'Take the initiative, speak to a newspaper with a proposal to return the New Year's Day celebration to the children, and we will support.' So in 1935, Pravda, in its one of its December editions, said, 'All people must celebrate New Year and have a tree.' And no sooner did that go out as the word of truth from Pravda, than people all over the Russian Empire began to celebrate with trees. Now you can imagine, here is, by the way, a New Year tree being delivered to the residents in Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan. And here is the first legal New Year's celebration in the Uzbeki Republic. Soviet Republic. So across the Soviet Union now, people are mandated, for the sake of the children, to restore a Christmas tree to a celebrative New Year's. And here we begin to have 1937. Here's the postcard, 1937 New Year's postcard with the standard New Year's clock in the background, because this is New Year's. This is not Christmas. So going forward for the bulk of the 20th century into today, the tree in the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation is a New Year's tree, and the celebration is for the children. On one of the lead magazines, we begin to see covers, 1950, 1952, 1954, the Christmas covers or the New Year's covers for this now officially mandated celebration. People begin to take home trees. This could have been a photograph taken in the United States, for example. It is, in fact, in the Soviet Union for New Year's. Big reminder. Shopping for toys for New Year's. And every major cultural institution in the Soviet Union began to hold galas, parties for the children. Ever since Stalin approved this kind of celebration with a tree, the largest one, of course, in the Kremlin itself. Even Nikita Khrushchev shows up at such an event, and programming on TV now includes New Year's kind of programming. Special movies come out featuring this New Year's celebration. Postcards are again produced with trees on them and stamps as well for New Year's celebrations. During World War II, a special series of postcards to send to people at the front. You can see the children doing that. You can see Grandfather Frost at the front. These could be sent to the Soviet soldiers on the front to celebrate New Year's. And of course, postcards are a great way to see what's current in terms of the cultural identity. And you can see what's current here. This is the polar expedition, one of many that the Soviets and, by the way, the Russian Empire itself sent into the north. And you can see the huge emphasis on space that is part of now the ongoing iconography, visual vocabulary for these postcards and for things that get sent to people to celebrate New Year's, not Christmas, New Year's. The tree is now a New Year's event. And with that comes the elevation of Grandfather Frost and Snow Maiden. Now, this has been a part of Russian Empire folklore for a long time, but it's during the Soviet period that these two become the main figures for that New Year's celebration. And here you see many versions of it. Here's a painting on the top of a lacquer box, and here is a sample of the multitudes of versions of carved Grandfather Frost that can be found to this day all over the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. And there's the Soviet cookbook, the Book of Tasty and Healthy Foods. And here, this is the front page of it. Every household had one, and here's its sample feast for New Year's, not Christmas, New Year's. because this is now a non-religious, in the traditional sense, in the Christian sense, not a religious holiday, but a Soviet holiday. And as I mentioned, galas and parties everywhere for the children. They're called yulkas or a yulka. Here we have one in Moscow. These are very elaborate, expensive in major cities. Major institutions will hold these children's events. I'm showing you some pictures of that kind of yulka, but I'm also showing you pictures of New Year's party in a children's hospital in Leningrad, for example, or in a kindergarten. This is what the kindergarteners would do. So all around in every part of the Soviet Union, institutions like schools and culture centers and factories and collective farms are holding these kinds of yulkas for kids. And here, of course, an adult version of a party. At the museum, we have every year an exhibit which exhibits some of these things. And we had an exhibit called The Masquerade here, in which we had some of the beautiful masks that could be available to children to wear, because this is a masquerade party. As a child, you dress up in a character for this party as much as you are able to do. These are, of course, the kind of masks that one would purchase, perhaps, or have if you could afford them. A cat and a Puss in Boots. Puss in Boots are very common. Here is a shot of some of the masks plus their attendant costuming. Most of the costuming is just things that were readily available to the children to use. And of course, many of the costumes were, most of the costumes homemade. Even masks were homemade. So this kind of costuming and celebration of New Year's became standard in the later Soviet Union after 1936. Again, if the tree is okay, you need to decorate it, right? You can't just have a plain old tree. You have to decorate it. And so at first, on that very first day, that kind of last minute, get out, do a tree for New Year's, people kind of created their own thing. And a lot of people, some, I don't know how many, but enough people still had baubles in the back closet from the days when, of course, the Christmas tree was part of Christmas celebration. So some people would haul those out. But generally speaking, what people began to need is decorations for the tree. The Museum of Russian Art happens to have one of the largest collections of Soviet era ornaments, I think probably in the world, thanks to a donor who collected them avidly after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so every year we put up a tree that contains another theme of some of these ornaments. And so I'm able to show you some of these designs because of the collection that we have. So as you can see, stars, of course. Now we think Star Bethlehem, of course, if we think of the Christmas tree at Christmas. But star is also the five-pointed star of the Russian Revolution, and you put the hammer and sickle in the middle of it. This is kind of a cardboard ornament, because that's what you had on hand. And so you tend to make your ornaments out of what you have on hand. You have cardboard on hand, you have that you can cut and paint, you have light bulbs on hand that you can repurpose into ornaments. You have pine cones on hand, and so you can make pine cone kind of ornaments. And you have beads on hand, so you can create bead constructions as well. And gradually over time, more and more things get created, get added to New Year's, and ornaments become producible. But very much the New Year tree remains a kind of what we would call a craft project. In other words, lots of inventiveness around things that already exist, paper, cardboard, tinfoil, and that kind of thing that can be repurposed into ornaments with some creativity by families or even on a broader scale. However, things do get produced, and there are lots of paper decorations that get produced. Of course, there are the garlands that you can always make, but again, you can also purchase paper garlands that you can hang on the tree. As I mentioned, you can make things out of cardboard and so forth, but you can get more and more sophisticated until finally, of course, that same motif gets produced in a glass bulb. The same thing is true of these kind of ornaments. So you can make out of felt different figures, but at a certain point, you can also purchase them. So increasingly, especially during the Khrushchev era and beyond, you can actually find these to buy. And I have to include the corn ear because, of course, with the corn ear, we know we're in the Khrushchev era of New Year's tree decorations, he being so big on importing Iowa corn into the steppe. What's always present, though, is a clock of some kind. And the clock on New Year's Eve almost always has its hand pointed to 5 minutes to 12. Not to 12, but to the 11 that indicates we're not quite there yet. And you will see that clock reproduced all over. In fact, the clock in Red Square becomes a version of our Times Square in New York. It's that prominent a New Year's feature in this Soviet New Year's celebration. I've already shown you the preponderance in the space era of astronauts and rockets, but that's also true in Christmas ornaments. In fact, the Soviet Union is very proud of all of its airborne options. And so you will see multiple airplanes, hot air balloons, rockets, etc. And you will, of course, see the requisite, initially the requisite paintings of the leaders, but people were pretty insistent that this was not an ideological celebration. This was to be a celebration for the kids, for joy, not for ideological purposes. So yes, there are hints of that of ideology, of course, with the use of the star. But for the most part, you will not see a lot of faces of the leaders, so to speak, for the most part. Now, Khrushchev, of course, was famous for building lots and lots of housing. Housing was in a bad way in the Soviet Union. And during his era, lots of housing went up. Apartment-style housing quickly built. Not always well constructed, and certainly the apartments were not large. So if you were going to have a New Year's tree in your apartment, you had to have a miniature. Here is a tree that is about 12 to 17 inches high. This is it comes in that box. And here is a box full of little tiny ornaments that you too could put on your tree if you wanted to in your small living space. So there is also, of course, a series of painters and artists who celebrate this new opportunity to bring joy in the wintertime on New Year's Day. So here's a family, 1951, it's called Before New Year, and you know that because this family is coming home with its New Year tree. There it comes. And here is a young boy who has returned home for the holidays, a 1948 painting. Another painting of the children at the tree, and there you see in their hands the masks that they can use for the upcoming Yulka. They are really dressed for it, of course. Celebration of New Year's at school, a painting that celebrates that. And of course, at the New Year tree in 1943, we are in the middle of World War II, of course, but we still have a painting in the up north area of a tree for the family. Notice who is missing from this scene, of course, the father. He is likely on the front, either fighting or already dead. The Soviet army recruited so many of its army during World War II from the villages like this. And so many men were either killed or in POW camps or on the front by 1943. Of course, Lenin is not alive, right? But an appropriate understanding that this is approved by Lenin, particularly with his and his wife's love of children, it is perfectly appropriate in a very realistic painting to actually include him in the painting because this has been inspired by Lenin, of course. And the trees become public. Here is a New Year tree in public in 1947, a New Year's party with older children, of course, and a still life painting of the kinds of things you would eat on New Year's. And then finally, what happens to the tree when New Year's is over? Here it is, out in the snow by itself, stripped of all of its ornaments, just a little flag, a little bit of ornamentation visible on some of the ends of the branches. The time of joy is now over. Again, we have a huge group of Soviet painters who paint winter, who paint particularly midwinter when it's really, really snowing. And I'm showing you just a collection, a handful of these. This one painted in 1946, right after the war in the up north area. Timkov is a very famous Soviet Leningrad painter. And he paints amazing pieces. I'll show you a picture of him as well, because he's quite important, especially in this painting of snow. He spent 10 years of his painting life painting snow paintings. This one is from 1969. There's his dates. And this one is Leningrad, an overview of Leningrad in the winter time. And what stands out to you, of course, is the fact that Leningrad is also a highly industrial area because you see all the smokestacks, the industrial smokestacks in the background, while at the same time celebrating this winter. And here is his painting entitled Fields. So he goes out and captures what snow looks like on the fields outside of Leningrad. And the academic dasha in the wintertime, 1972, the Leningrad artists, those that were official artists, had the right to spend summers and even winters at a few of the academic dachas or country places, and sketch and paint and draw. And Timkoff, as an accepted artist, takes advantage of that over and over and over again, and ends up producing all of these magnificent pieces. This one's called First Snow, and excuse me, this one's First Snow. The other one was Icy Creek. And so you can see his impressionistic technique that he, as a Leningrad artist, continued to use when he painted snow. So at this point, I am going to say thank you for being part of this conversation, and open it up for the time that we have left for questions and comments and thoughts. Let me just put that screen up there. So if any of you have comments, I should have said, please do come up with questions and comments, and put them in the chat if you need to remember them. My apologies for not suggesting that. But if any of you do have comments or questions, please feel free. We have quite a number of people online, I see, so it might be a little difficult to spot you if you just raise your hand. So if you want to put your comments or questions in the chat, then we will see them, and perhaps Thea and Ann can help me spot those too, and also spot raised hands if people are raising their hands. Okay.
My question was, I don't know, do you cover Lithuanian art too or not?
We certainly could. We have had a wonderful exhibition of Estonian printmaking, which was world famous during the Soviet era. But Lithuania per se, I do not cover that I know of. Right. I would have to do a separate research project on Lithuanian art to see if some of the people that I'm quoting here are in fact Lithuanian and not just generic Soviet citizens. See, that's the difficulty with both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. We label these artists as Soviet artists, but they might be really Ukrainian, and they might be really Belarusian, they might be Lithuanian, they might be Polish, in fact. That is the difficulty when you're working with an empire concept or a Soviet Union concept of art. And so, like I said, I've become, since the war broke out in Ukraine, I myself have become more and more conscious of particularly Ukrainian artists that would fly under the label of Russian artists when they're really Russian Empire artists who are Ukrainian, right? It's like, yeah.
I was wondering about those Lithuanian snowflakes that I think they're made of straws or something. They'll have a tree that's all white snowflakes, and I didn't know if that was a Christmas thing or a New Year's thing. So
if it's pre-1920 or 1926, it's a Christmas thing. If it's post 1926, if it's post 1935, it's a New Year's thing.
Somebody who maybe joined us late is asking about the current exhibits at the museum. I know you discussed that
Sure.
pre-class.
Oh yeah, happy to tell you and to encourage you to come up and see them if you have a chance. We have a large nesting doll exhibit on our main level, 1,000 dolls. We have the museum owns one of the largest collections of nesting dolls probably in the world. I mean, the donor that gave his collection to us, 3,000 sets at least. Anyway, we have a huge collection of nesting dolls, and this is the largest exhibit we've created from that collection to this point. So it's a gorgeous exhibit, very kid-friendly too. We have lots of kids' activities and so forth. In our small fireside gallery, we have, this is this is always interesting. We have a mushroom exhibit. Okay, now let me explain. The artist who has done these watercolors of Russian mushrooms, Russian Federation mushrooms, but mostly Russian mushrooms, is world famous, and he paints what we have come to call mushroom portraits. In other words, the mushroom, the particular kind of mushroom that is named in the painting, in various forms. So various versions of that mushroom as he's discovered them in real life. And then bits and pieces from the environment in which you can find that mushroom. So you could use his painting to find that mushroom because he gives you all the clues for the environment that produces this mushroom. And he's done that with mushroom after mushroom. Those of you who love mushrooms, this is an exhibit to see. And he is as I said, he's internationally known. He has exhibited at the Arboretum up here as well. And this is our second exhibition of his materials because they're so incredible. And then on the mezzanine level, the top level of our museum, we have, again, I'm running out of adjectives, so I'll just say 19th century, very complex, miniaturistic scenes included in these icons. An icon exhibit that demonstrates the linkage between icon painting, particularly in Pollock, and the production of lacquer boxes in the Soviet era. So the exhibit includes, I would say, about half of these very elaborate icons, multi-scene icons, miniature painting on the icons. Half of those probably come from the town of Pollock, which of course we know better as the producer of lacquer boxes. And then on the lower level, we have a collection. We have now a permanent collection. In spite of the fact that we're only 20 years old, the museum, because of its donor base, has accumulated so many gifts of collections by people who have made collections of particularly Ukrainian and Russian art, that we are now able to rotate parts of our permanent collection through a permanent exhibit on the lower level of the museum. And on the lower level being installed right now is the New Year's exhibit for this year. So the main attraction is really the nesting dolls, but we will also have always a holiday exhibit. We call it a holiday exhibit, not a Christmas exhibit, because it is, of course, a Soviet New Year's exhibit thematically. So again, from a huge collection of everything New Year's celebration that came from a donor who made that collection, donor by the name of Kim Belichick. So those are the things you will find. And then Thea has already done a commercial for the gift shop. So, so the gift shop is quite wonderful too. I will say that because of the war that's happening, we are not able to deal directly with producers in the Russian Federation, of course, but we do our best to continue to find things that that speak of Russian Empire and Soviet Union and present day broad context, including places like Belarus Poland, Ukraine, of course, etc. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. Always happy to talk about the Museum of Russian Art. By the way, we're mostly known by our acronym Tamora. So I did put the full name of the museum there, but everybody calls us Tamora. So if you hear that, know that, yeah, that's us.
Someone commented that they enjoyed the exhibits that were at the airport a few years ago, nesting dolls and samovars. Was that one of yours?
Yes, that was one of ours. If it's thematically a Russian Empire, Soviet Union materials, it's us. We had an exhibit at there and also at Orchestra Hall. Off and on, we've had a small presence with artifacts. So yes, you will. That comes from us. Yeah, yeah.
You have lots of compliments in chat.
Oh,
So I
thank
just thought I
you.
would tell you that.
Yeah.
I don't.
I have to admit myself, I am not Russian. People often ask me, oh, Carol, you must be Russian. I am not Russian. I came to a passion for this culture, this geographic area, because of the museum. And I think the museum itself, on a national level, has really raised awareness in terms of the certainly the Soviet culture, but more than that, the varying cultures of the Russian Empire and the surrounding places now that the Soviet Union has collapsed and we have different discrete countries around what used to be out of what was once the Soviet Union. I think we've raised awareness for the cultures there and the richness of the cultures there. Yeah. I remember my own personal story. I became a volunteer in 2005. I became a docent and have been with the museum ever since in varying capacities. And I would say that when I first became a docent, I said, I know nothing about Russian art generally. I just think it's magnificent from what you're showing me here. And there were basically two books in English. If I read those books, I would be an expert. So I read those two books and became an expert. I still read those two books because they are, in fact, incredibly good. I always recommend them. But I'm here to tell you that my bookshelf of Russian publications about Russian Empire and Soviet art and culture has overwhelmed my bookshelf space. There are so many books, particularly on the artists. You know, there are now individual volumes on varying artists, which never would have happened or would have been known had the museum not existed, I think, and not been formed. So I'm happy to say you now have to read thousands of books to become an expert, or you at least have to have them on your shelf. But there's still two basic ones that if you read those, yeah, you're an expert.
Have there been traveling exhibits of Russian artists? Some of the ones you mentioned, I'd really like to see in person.
I know. Here's the difficulty with seeing Russian Empire art and Soviet art in person. None of what I showed you is available here in the West, which means your chances of seeing it will depend on restoring normal relationships with the Russian Federation. At this moment, I would not advise you to try to sneak in under an American passport to see art. All I can say is when the Russian Federation is more amenable again to travel, you really need to travel. We have not been able to get traveling exhibitions from the Russian Federation since the lawsuit was the lawsuit in the New York court system acknowledged that a group of people in New York had the legal rights to manuscripts now being held in the state library in the Russian Federation. The minute that decision came down, no one could get art or any artifacts from the museum system in the Russian Federation. Because believe it or not, artifacts like that are held hostage when they come to a political public square that has that kind of a legal statement about properties owned. So there's any number of art things that don't travel just because people don't want them repossessed or used as bartering chips. And that is true of all of the public institutions in the Russian Federation at the moment. I even have a personal story on that, because that decision was made when we had an exhibit scheduled of Nikolai Feshin's paintings. He was a Russian, or a Russian Empire painter who left about 1923 and came to New York and became, through a long story, a important Taos art colony painter. So he's connected with George O'Keeffe, although he remains very Russian if you look at him. So a number of his paintings are held in the Russian Federation. They own a large number of them because he was an instructor and a painter there, recognized painter there before he came here. So we had an exhibit. There was an exhibit that was constructed of his US materials and his Russian materials. And the US materials were over in Russia, in the Russian Federation, touring with the Russian Federation materials in this composite exhibit. The legal decision was made in New York, and immediately we would not be getting the Russian side of that exhibit. A long conversation about whether we should get the exhibit at all. The Seattle Museum was going to get it after us. So the two of us, huge conversation. We ended up taking the exhibit anyway because there were a couple of private pieces in that exhibit that would come to us. And there were a couple of pieces here collected in interesting places like Baylor University that we would have as well. So the difficulty of us continuing to get exhibitions from the Russian Federation, which we had been doing, makes it impossible for us to get any of these materials, right? And so, yeah, normally, if we had normal relationships, I'd probably be inviting you all to come with me on a trip to Russia to see some of these, because I've led 5 trips to Russia with that intentionality. COVID stopped my 6th one. And of course, now there's no hope, there's no possible way. So
someone asked the types of things that you sell in your gift shop, and I would add, is there a website where people can look at things in your gift shop?
Absolutely, absolutely. Simply go to Tamora.org, T-M-O-R-A. Just type that in, .org, and you will see a space there for the gift shop. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The gift shop does a lot of, as you can imagine, distance retailing. They put a lot up. You can order from the gift shop and have it shipped. Of course, that's standard procedure these days. Yeah. They also have a nice selection of children's books and books about Russia, also in Russian. And the museum now has a huge Russian language learning opportunity. We have online distance possibilities to learn the Russian language. As colleges and universities have downsized, a lot of them have downsized their Russian Federation department. So the ability to learn Russian in that kind of a setting, those opportunities have diminished greatly. Yeah.
Carol, I'm fascinated with the tank clocks in the gift shop. Can you tell me anything about those? They're the tank clocks?
The tank clocks. You know what? I don't even know what you're talking about. Can you put
They're
one online?
vintage, it's from a Soviet clock factory, and they call them tank clocks. And I think the reason they call them that is because they're made out of tank parts. I'm not positive though.
Yeah. Well, I'm here to tell you that, when we started selling Soviet style clocks, I thought to myself, this is really interesting. In a digital age, we are selling Soviet style clocks, antique clocks. And they have just flown off the shelves. I mean, in the first place, a lot of them are beautifully designed. Their Art Deco kind of look, which is kind of an in look now, a kind of that modern look is back in. And so I think that's one reason, because there have been several that I've looked at and thought, oh boy, I don't need a clock, but if I needed a clock, this would be the clock I would buy. Yeah. Yeah. So for some reason, they have just taken off. So we have a very good person who runs the shop. She used to run the shop for the Swedish Institute, and now she's running ours. So we have a very experienced person, and she's just delightful. She just finds all kinds of things that are delightful in the shop. So yeah, yeah. And to tell you the truth, because I don't work in the shop or deal with the shop that much, I have not investigated everything I should probably know about what they're actually carrying. Yeah. Yeah.
Your permanent collection of art there is something I just treasure, and I keep photographs of it on my phone so I can go and look at it. Some of the artwork that's downstairs, the last place I saw it, and it's unbelievable. People, go see tomorrow. It is amazing.
Yes. Well, for those of you who know the museum, you know that the Louvre has the Mona Lisa and we have the milkmaids. And they are now on the lower level on almost permanent exhibit down there. We do include them elsewhere as well. And then there's another painting down there that's rivaling the milkmaids, frankly, and that's the girl in the birch forest. And that's all I'll say about it. So there's two down on our main,
Okay.
on the lower level main, our permanent exhibit collection. There's two down there that people just love. Yeah.
I wish I could find it real quick on my phone so I can show everybody, but I don't have it. But oh, Carol, I'm so glad to talk to you again. And thank you so much for being available. And let's get in touch about doing another class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're already booked for fall, I'm assuming.
We're booking
Or
for
for
spring
winter.
right now.
Winter. Yeah. You're
Yeah,
booking.
we may have a class from you. I'll check and I'll send you an email too. So,
Okay. Okay.
all right.
Yeah. Know that I'm always available. The beauty of Zoom, that we learned about during COVID. This is
Right.
at least one good thing that came out of it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And
And-
everyone, have a great holiday season if we don't see you again. And Carol, have a great holiday and take care of yourself.
Yes, thank you. And thanks to all of you who were part of this. We appreciate you no end. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Happy holidays, everyone.